Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the One Lung Lounge. Today, I get the opportunity again to talk with Dr. Matt Rice with GO2 for Lung Cancer. This is our second episode talking about clinical trials. And if you didn't get a chance to watch the first episode, I encourage you to do so. So, hi, Matt. Welcome back, and thanks for joining me again.
Nice to be back, Ashley. Thank you.
So now I want to take a moment to talk about a program that made a huge difference in my cancer journey, the Lung Match program. So, Matt, can you walk us through what Lung Match is, how it works, and who it's for?
So Lung Match, it's a program that we offer through GoTo. It's free concierge-like service that is meant to kind of help patients with their most common questions that are related to treatment. So I kind of think about them as three pillars, which is biomarker testing, treatment questions, and clinical trial questions. So often, most of the time, we are available to anyone, whether it be a patient or a loved one of a patient, to kind of just reach out and we can kind of talk through information with you on as complex a level as you need, essentially. I've had individuals where I've gone to the really minute details and scientific levels of what's happening in the DNA of the cells that cause certain things to happen, which I think is actually the minority. Most of the time, patients kind of just want to have someone who can talk through what is happening in their treatment journey and what options they have available without judgment. And I think that that's really where we specialize because all the members of our team are really kind and compassionate and willing to kind of just like listen to what you've been going through, help you understand what types of questions you have. And I think one of the benefits we have is that we aren't really bound by a 15-minute appointment like sometimes your doctor may be, which is not a fault to the doctor. This is just the system that we have kind of set up. But we've had individuals that I've talked to for 2 hours, and sometimes that's what somebody needs. And if you want to cover 10 topics, I'm happy to cover 10 topics. If you want to really drill down into the details of one topic, we can drill down into the details of that topic. So it's really kind of personalized to what that individual is looking for. And then the nice thing is that we're not kind of just like a one um, touch point, then you never hear from us again. Most of the time, we tend to build relationships of some sort with our contacts. And we'll check up on you every once in a while, see how you're doing, make sure that we can answer additional questions. And we're trying to provide support, but also resources to you so that you feel empowered in making treatment options for yourself, while being fully informed on what all of your options are.
I know that there are other like trial matching services that exist out there, one of which is clinicaltrials.gov. So I'm interested how Lung Match is different than, say, clinicaltrials.gov or other services that exist.
Yeah, so one of the things I think that makes Lung Match really special is that for starters, we're like very focused on lungs specifically. So there are other very well done clinical trial matching services from other organizations. Often I find a lot of them tend to cover all different cancer areas. And they tend to have large staff, so they can do that more often. But usually for the individual that person may be talking to, you have a person who might be talking to one patient who's a lung cancer patient, and then the next person they're talking to might be colorectal, and the next person after that might be pancreatic. I think that the fact that we really focus specifically on lung cancer itself is a benefit to us because we're thinking about these same treatment decisions over and over again. We're very familiar with the space. We stay up to date with the cutting edge studies that are coming out on the treatment options so that we can kind of like bring you the most up-to-date information and speak confidently to the information that we are presenting to you. For something like clinicaltrials.gov, I think it's a fantastic resource and I actually make use of it a lot during my clinical trial searches for my patients. But clinicaltrials.gov is very not patient friendly, and there's a lot of information in there that may be confusing and it's sometimes incomplete. Sometimes one of the biggest issues I run into is that a trial might say that it is recruiting, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every cohort within that trial is recruiting. So if they're looking for people with all these different mutations at a certain point, maybe they have enough of mutation A and they don't have enough of mutation B, it'll still say that the trial is recruiting, even if the mutation A is no longer being recruited. So I think that the nice thing is that we have kind of like that personal touch and a lot of familiarity within the space to be able to kind of help. And then again, we're not bound by appointment periods where you only have us for a certain amount of time and then we have to go. We make a point to try to like schedule around what is easiest for you and your time to answer the questions that are important to you and have follow-up if necessary.
My perspective, clinicaltrials.gov is so confusing to the point where I don't think I was not even able to like review trials for lung cancer.
Gov is a great tool, but you need to know exactly how you're using it. And even then, there are some shortcomings to it. And I don't think it's a fault of the program. It's just it's a hard thing to do. Um, and I also think one of the other benefits of like what we can kind of help with that is sometimes even if you know what you're doing, you might get to the end of the journey of looking for what you're eligible for in clinicaltrials.gov, and you might have 20 options. I
Mhm.
personally don't think having 20 options is always the most useful to most people. So what I did for you, that I've also done for other patients, is often I will make them aware that there are more options, but sometimes I will kind of winnow it down to three or four really good options. And I'll use data to back up why I'm choosing those options. But also, I often will kind of give people options that have different mechanisms of action, or basically like different ways the drugs are targeting the cancer, so that you are not comparing, drug A and drug B that target the same thing and have the same payload and do more or less the same thing. And you have to try to figure out which one of those is better. Sometimes it's more beneficial to be able to look at this drug attacks the cancer this way, this drug attacks cancer this way. This is the data we have. Now we can have a more informed discussion about what to do. And that's again something that clinicaltrials.gov really doesn't have the flexibility for right now. That I think having a personal touch from someone like a navigator from GoTo can really kind of help with.
For sure. And we briefly touched on this in the first episode, but are navigators volunteers? Like, what is your training and background as a navigator?
So it kind of varies where all of us come from. I think for our team specifically, two of us have PhDs and the other two have master's degrees. Both of them come from all of us come from different backgrounds in terms of what we did. So I have a PhD in pharmacology and I did a lot of research on genomic instability. So I like the little nitty-gritty details about how cancer actually is happening on a molecular level. The other PhD in our laboratory, I think he focused a little bit more on the clinical side and translational information about how cancer ends up impacting treatment and care. One of the other navigators was a former nurse who is fantastic at being able to connect with patients because she's used to being in a clinic from when she was a little bit younger. And then the fourth individual is someone who's really compassionate, has a background in medical sciences as well, and she does a great job connecting with people on a personal level. She's very effective at being able to build relationships with her patients, and she's also the only individual on our team that can speak Spanish. So she has a unique um, offering there where she can connect to a community that most of us actually don't have the ability even to reach out to. So we all kind of come from different backgrounds, but everyone that works for the Lung Match team is a member of the GoTo research team. They have different responsibilities outside of Lung Match, but it all comes down to that we all really love the idea of being able to connect with patients, help them understand their diagnosis, and empower them to be able to make the treatment decisions that's right for them.
I'm wondering if patients need biomarker testing before moving forward with trials. So if someone doesn't have any molecular testing done, A, are they able to move forward with trials? And B, how does Lung Match provide help with navigating potentially getting biomarker testing done?
So it's a great question. I'll clarify for currently that I think that primarily talks more about non-small cell lung cancer. So we do talk with small cell lung cancer patients. Right now, the current standard is not to do biomarker testing for small cell lung cancer patients. I actually think you will see that shift in the next couple of years, but that could be a whole separate conversation for another day. But for non-small cell patients, um, I will say that I think for most clinical trials, they do want you to have some degree of biomarker testing. But most of the time, when we have talked to individuals on Lung Match, it's such a standard of care nowadays that most doctors will do the biomarker testing almost as a reflex as soon as they know you have non-small cell lung cancer. If you have not had biomarker testing, we do have the ability to kind of point you to in the right direction about one, making you and your doctor aware that you would qualify for it and why it's appropriate to be doing so. And we know a number of different companies that do biomarker testing routinely that a lot of hospitals tend to rely on that we can point them towards. We don't specifically partner with any one organization, so we don't kind of like point them in one direction versus the other. But we can kind of help you like facilitate getting that testing done. And then often for these clinical trials, if it is a really common mutation, so EGFR, the most common mutation that we tend to talk to individuals for in non-small cell lung cancer, the clinical trial itself will probably ask for the records from your previous testing so they can look at them prior to you joining. And then for some trials, if it's something that's a less common target, if it wasn't tested previously, sometimes the trial itself will do the testing. But it's kind of case by case basis.
So Matt, I'm wondering what is the general process if someone wants to connect with Lung Match and talk about clinical trials?
So for anyone that wants to connect with the Lung Match team or go-to in general, we have a wonderful helpline team that has a phone number and an email that you can reach out to at any point during the day. Most of the time, you will probably receive a voicemail, but we always make a point of responding to these voicemails incredibly quickly, and we will call you back. So you generally start by reaching out to our helpline, which the phone number is 800-298-2436. Or you can send an email to support@goto.org. And then if you go to our website, goto.org, it's actually listed right in the top left of the screen on every single page, very easy to find. But the easiest thing to do is to use one of those modalities, whether it be phone or email. Reach out, say who you are, what you're looking for in terms of help. If you're looking for lung match specifically, you can ask for lung match specifically. And then just leave your contact information. And then often our helpline staff, which are wonderful, wonderful people that we rely really heavily on, do a great job of doing an initial contact to be able to gather some basic information like your diagnosis, maybe previous treatment history, and they kind of hand that information to us, which allows us to then just reach out to you and set up a conversation where we can talk about whatever it is you're looking for, whether it be biomarker information, treatment questions, or clinical trials. That is the most common way that most people will reach us.
And when you say have a meeting with you, is that via telephone, Zoom? Does it have to be in person?
So I have never met with someone in person yet. That actually would be quite interesting to do. It would really have to be on my toes and make sure I'm up to date with everything ahead of time because we do often set up phone calls with most people is the main form of communication. And the reason we do that is because when you ask a specific question, even if I do feel confident that I do know the answer to the question, I always want to make sure I do my due diligence to make sure that there's nothing new that has come out recently that I would be missing. So that's why we tend to set up phone calls. But I have also had primarily conversations with people who prefer email. And I've had individuals I've had Zoom phone calls with as well. So we kind of try to meet the patient at um, what is easiest for them. We will do it around your schedule, and we tend to do it around what is easiest for you to try to address your questions. And again, everything is kind of done through a follow-up. It's not just like a one point touch point that you talk to us and then you can't access us again. Most of the time, we'll like follow up with you on a routine basis just to see how you're doing and see if you have more questions. And that's always usually a good point to kind of like if you have something that kind of pops up that you had concerns about, we can set up another phone call or whatever it needs to be. But I always encourage the people that I talk to at least, you don't need to wait for me to reach out to you. If you have a question 2 days later, shoot me an email, I'll respond to it.
And it sounds like there are no costs associated with any of the lung match services, correct?
No, there is no cost associated with the lung match services or the helpline services. All these things are accessible to anybody, patient or caregiver for free.
So Matt, last week I reached out to the people in the lung cancer community on Instagram asking what questions they have about trials. We got some interesting questions and I'm excited to bring them into the conversation. So the first question, and when we talked about this, so if there's in the first episode, so if there's anything you'd like to add, are trials appropriate for all stages of lung cancer?
That's a great question. I think that most of the time when people are thinking about clinical trials, they're usually thinking about stage four trials. But there are trials for stage one, two, and three for non-small cell lung cancer, and then both for limited stage and extensive stage for small cell lung cancer. It's probably proportionately a lot more people that have stage four trials, but they do exist for earlier stages. The important thing for anyone at any stage in their journey is basically understanding where you are at that current moment, and being able to kind of just understand what the treatment is offering to you so you can understand if this is an option that you really want to explore a little bit more about. And that's kind of where Lung Match comes in. If you don't even really know where to start, I think a great place to do is just kind of reach out to our helpline and we can kind of like start you through that process. And again, we think that trials have an appropriate place in the conversation at every treatment step. Whether or not you choose to do a clinical trial at the earlier stages is entirely up to you.
The next question is, do lung removals exclude someone from clinical trials?
So I think in general, any sort of surgical resection is not going to make it so that you can do no clinical trials. However, a lot of clinical trials will have some sort of exclusion criteria about if you had a surgery, they will want you to be removed from that surgery by a certain amount of time. The amount of time will vary between between trials, but generally speaking, what they're doing is they want to make sure that you have had enough time to fully recover from that surgery. Sometimes a large surgery, like an entire lung, will probably be a little bit longer that they'll want to be removed from that surgery before you could join a trial than maybe something that's done minimally invasively. But having surgery itself is never going to exclude you from trials in general. There are a couple that may say that they don't want you to have ever had surgery, but that's really rare. Most of the time, if surgery is mentioned at all, it's just that they want you to be fully recovered before you join the clinical trial.
I think for me, I've reached out to 5 hospitals. The only question I've had around the pneumonectomy, which was about a year and a half ago, has been like, how is my functioning capacity? Do I
Mhm.
need a walker? Am I wheelchair bound? Like basically, how am I functioning with one lung? And I'm thinking they're gauging like, am I strong enough physically for the trial?
Pretty much, yep. So most of the time, you'll see a lot of the inclusion or exclusion criteria of a study is really trying to gauge the person's overall health. And that is to that exact point. They're just trying to make sure that you are strong enough to be able to go through the trial, because some of them do have side effects that do impact quality of life. So it's important for them to know that you're strong enough to be going through it. And then what I always add in addition to that is once we know that you are strong enough to go through the trial, it's important to make sure that you are communicating any sort of side effects that you do have from the trial so that you can continue to remain healthy. There's a place in lung cancer care for palliative care where I think a lot of people tend to think that that means it's what you get at the end of your life. That's not quite the same thing. Palliative care is just meant to kind of treat symptoms of what you're experiencing, which is meant to improve quality of life. So, yeah, most of the time, at least in terms of surgery, they just want to make sure that you're feeling strong enough and you're recovered enough to go on to the next step.
So I'm wondering if that is related to criteria around like organ function generally. I'm thinking about my liver. So a year ago, I had a reaction to a treatment I was on. I was on an immunotherapy. I went into something called immunotherapy-induced hepatitis. I had to go on steroids and fully healed at this point, fully healed for like 8 or 9 months. But every hospital, it's almost the first question they ask, how is your liver? Are you still on steroids? Like how are your like what's your liver panel look like? So is it kind of in the same yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of in the same vein. Most of the time, they want to obviously make sure that you're fully recovered because they want to be you at your healthiest that you can be prior to entering the clinical trial. But sometimes it also comes from that preclinical data or even the early phase data where, for example, for the liver, if they do know that the drug has some sort of effect on liver levels themselves, they want to make sure that they're starting from a healthy standpoint before that, so that they can understand what the effects of that specific treatment are going to be on your liver. This also goes for stuff like sometimes people that maybe have inflammatory diseases. If for specifically for stuff that's like an immunotherapy where it's really engaging your immune system. They want to know about those ahead of time so they know if you're susceptible potentially to having a strong side effect to having some sort of immune modulating therapy. But again, all of it's mostly just place setting to make sure that you are healthy to begin with.
So the next question is about a specific drug. The person is wondering, are there trials with tarlatamab?
Tarlatamab.
Thank you.
Um, So yeah, trials for tarlatamab. There are some trials going on for it right now. So tarlatamab is a therapy that was approved in small cell lung cancer specifically that targets DLL3, which is a protein receptor on the surface of cancer cells. It's overexpressed in small cell lung cancer, and it's really exciting because um, I think they kind of bill it to be more of an immunotherapy than a targeted therapy, but it's the first targeted therapy-like treatment option for small cell ever. Um, that being said, when it was approved, it's been approved in the second line setting right now. So right now you have to receive a different therapy first. Um, before you receive tarlatamab. And so there are trials going on right now looking at if it's appropriate to be given to people in the first line setting instead of the standard of care, which is currently chemotherapy, and radiation, usually. So yeah, tarlatamab is a great example of a drug that has been previously approved that is still being studied for better use now.
Mhm. The next question is, what makes someone want to do a trial?
It's a great question. I think a lot of it does really come down at the end of the day to the person who wants to join the trial might have their own specific reasons. Um, but for a lot of people, I think it comes down to a couple different things. Um, I think that there is an inherent desire for a lot of people to be able to try to give back to the community that they are a part of. And people that have been diagnosed with lung cancer often find a lot of community and support with people who have also been diagnosed with lung cancer. And participating in a clinical trial for a lot of people is a way that they can kind of like contribute back to not only the people who are also looking for similar treatments, but for people who haven't even been diagnosed yet that may be needing that treatment at some point in the future. By participating in the trial, you're able to help show that this new therapy may or may not be really effective for people that have certain um, markers, and they can help understand what the side effects that those people should be experiencing are. So I think there's a part of it that comes from that. Other people also engage with clinical trials because they offer an opportunity to access treatments that are really promising earlier. Um, every drug that has been FDA approved at some point was going through the clinical trial process themselves. And often we get early signs and data that a drug is going to be really promising. So we just talked about tarlatamab for small cell lung cancer. We didn't, again, prior to tarlatamab, have a treatment option for small cell lung cancer that wasn't chemotherapy. So when we had early stage data that was showing that targeted therapy had really good outcomes. Now, granted, there are serious side effects to be considered with tarlatamab that people should be aware of if they're considering it, but it does offer a really good option for some people to be able to be on a targeted therapy that generally has less side effects than chemotherapy. And the easiest way to access that for a lot of people for a while was by doing a clinical trial. So that's really kind of another reason people might end up choosing to join a clinical trial. And then other people, it also comes down to, frankly, that maybe it is the option that they have left that is best for them. A lot of people, I think that when you're going through treatment are afraid that they're going to hit the end of the road and there is no treatment left. I haven't really talked to anybody yet that has never had a standard of care option available to them. It's just a matter of sometimes as we're going farther and farther down what is the FDA approved list, we're getting to options that maybe have less confidence in how much they're willing to help you. So, for example, there are about 8 or 9 different chemotherapy drugs we can give you that all work slightly differently. It doesn't mean they're going to work really well. So sometimes when you have individuals to get to those later lines of therapy, they're really looking for something that, maybe the chemotherapy is something they don't want to do, or it's something they don't have a lot of confidence in, and they just want to give something else a try. And I completely understand that point of view as well. I think that what we do when we explore clinical trials is we try to make sure that the deck is stacked as much in your favor as possible, that what we're connecting you to is something that we have a good reason to believe would be effective for you, and that we know from the preclinical data and early stage data that we do have is going to be safe so that you have as much time to kind of maximize um, as you need. Because for some people, it really is a matter of trying to figure out what do they want from this part of their treatment journey and trying to understand if that is the right choice for them.
Hmm. People often ask me this, what do trials pay for when someone joins? Primarily, I'm asked about gas, flights, food, hotels, and is someone compensated for joining a trial?
So generally speaking, people do not get compensated for participating in a clinical trial. And in terms of the things that can get covered, it really does depend on trial to trial. So for someone who has insurance, participating in a clinical trial, aspects of that will probably be covered by insurance itself. But there is a little bit of a gap. So, for example, if you have to travel to a major city in order to get your clinical trial, if the transportation cost is something that affects you. Sometimes the clinical trial will cover it, sometimes they will not. It really depends on the design of the trial and what they set aside money for ahead of time. What we as advocates are trying to do, and when I talk to these pharmaceutical companies that are setting up trials and they're asking us, hey, what do you think about our design? Is there other things we should be considering? We do spend a lot of time talking to them about these additional barriers to entry that a lot of people experience for clinical trials, such as transportation costs, and saying, hey, if you have an individual that is, living outside of the major city, how is this person getting to your trial? How are they getting from your trial? What about the lost wages they have from having to miss a period of time? What if they have children that they can't bring with them to the hospital? Or what if they have children that they do bring with them to the hospital? How do you deal with all these types of things? And some companies are doing a lot more work around trying to make sure that they create support for these types of things right now. And then other companies are starting to move in that direction as well. So the short answer is it really does vary trial to trial, but we are moving in the direction of making sure that it becomes more inclusive and an easier barrier to access for clinical trials than it has historically been.
Um, I'm curious how the landscape is going to change for trials with the funding being like brought to zero for lung cancer.
So I do think it's a very real concern for a lot of people and something that I think a lot about. I think that given everything that is happening right now, I'm not going to be naive enough to say that it will not impact patients. Like it certainly will in some fashion probably impact patients. In terms of clinical trials specifically, I think that a lot of these pharmaceutical companies have a vested interest in trying to make sure that they can still continuing doing these trials to identify drugs that are beneficial to patients that they can bring to market.
Mhm.
I think that you are going to continue to see that happening. And there may potentially be difficulties associated with that going forward, but that I don't think it will put things at a complete stop. It just might be that we need to get more creative about how we tackle some of these barriers. And I actually think what you might see going forward is maybe utilization of more organizations like GoTo to be able to support patients, because a lot of the services we offer are free, to be able to support patients in addition to what the doctor is already providing to help navigate you to these types of things. And then there are also organizations, for example, we don't really do a lot of financial assistance, but we do refer to a lot of financial assistance resources. And I think that as you see more and more people needing those types of resources, you will also see probably more people then recognizing that they need to support those organizations that are providing those types of services. So I think hard times bring people closer together, and I'm not going to be naive enough to say that there's not going to be difficulties associated with everything that's happening, but I think they will also, in the long term, help people be more cooperative with one another to really get the help that people are looking for. And
Mhm.
that's the hopeful aspect that I have for this approach.
People ask me how they can get involved with advocacy work, especially like in DC. So do you have any recommendations or advice for people that want to like connect with GoTo and be a little more involved with advocacy?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have an entire advocacy arm that does this wonderful annual meeting called the Voices Summit. It takes place in March, so it just took place for 2025. But if you are interested, that is something we do annually. And there is a link on our website where you can kind of connect for the Voices Summit for next year, which literally will bring patients and survivors to the Capitol Hill. And we kind of often will take people to meet with their congressmen or their senators from their given state and be able to advocate on behalf of themselves for lung cancer care and funding and trying to get better resources for individuals who need not just for lung cancer, all cancer care across the United States. So there's a great way to get involved by doing that. If you wanted to be more involved with GoTo a little bit sooner than on the annual tradition, we have a number of different things that people can participate in throughout the year, such as the Lung Cancer Living Room, which takes place both in person in California, but as well as virtually, where you can kind of participate in the conversation around lung cancer, um, build community. If you happen to be a lung cancer patient yourself, who maybe wants to be a support for somebody else, we also have a wonderful phone buddy program where you as an individual can connect with somebody who has been in a similar circumstance for support, but you yourself can also serve as a phone buddy to be that support for somebody else. If you wanted to be involved with advocacy a little bit more close to home, I believe there's a lot of stuff on our website about being able to contact your specific congressman in like pre-filled forms for the most part, where you can advocate for specific acts that we're working on. So, for example, we're working on an act right now as an organization for women's lung cancer and research because there is more women's lung cancer being diagnosed right now than ever before. We don't truly have an understanding as to why, because it's not properly funded. So, one of the things that our advocacy team is working on is trying to get more funding for women's research for lung cancer. You can find pre-filled forms on our website to be able to kind of talk to your congressman and say, hey, this is something that really matters to me that I think that you should be funding. And it is, even though in a time right now where I think maybe we don't do a great job always coming across the aisle and talking to one another, something that I think does touch a lot of people from different parts of the political spectrum, that cancer is one of these things that bring a lot of people together that I think we can still make progress on.
Yeah, well, especially because lung cancer has been historically so underfunded compared to other cancers. Like things need to change.
Yes, I think that we can definitely fund it a lot more, do a lot more research, and I think that what we're trying to do is take the best lessons from other cancers that do a really good job about receiving funding. So, for example, I think the breast cancer is by no measure is by every measure the best example of how to go about advocating for funding. And I think we can learn a lot from what the breast cancer foundations have been doing to try to get more funding and getting people awareness of breast cancer. That we can adapt a lot of those lessons into lung cancer and try to get it so that it is not so critically underfunded because a lot of people are being um, diagnosed with this disease every day. And I think that historically it's been considered like a smoker's disease. And most of the time, you'll never hear us ask someone about their smoking status because there's a lot of people that get lung cancer that have never smoked. And yes, it may dictate a small degree exactly what type of disease you were diagnosed with, but it shouldn't dictate the type of care and resources you have accesses to. So we don't usually even ask about it.
Yeah, and ultimately it doesn't matter, we're all the same once diagnosed, going through the same journey.
Lung cancer is lung cancer. The only true risk factor to getting lung cancer is having lungs. So,
Yes. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. A huge thank you again to Dr. Matt Rice and the GoTo for Lung Cancer Foundation for not only being here, but for the incredible work that you all are doing to make clinical trials more accessible and less overwhelming through your Lung Match program. And if you are navigating lung cancer and feeling lost about your next steps, please know you're not alone. Like we've talked about in today's episode, programs like Lung Match exist to support you. And I hope today's conversation helped shine a light on that. And if you did find this episode helpful, share it with someone who might need it, and be sure to follow the One Lung Lounge for more conversations like this and the GoTo for Lung Cancer Foundation. Thank you so much again, Matt, for joining me today.
well, thank you for having me. I hope that everyone who's listening found this information beneficial, and I encourage you, please reach out to both myself and to Ashley if you have more questions. We'd love to talk to you.